All right, bonjour. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Tribal University Relations, a call to the University of Minnesota to reckon with its origins as a land grab university. I'm thankful for all of you who are here with us in person today and also everyone who's with us on Zoom. Welcome. I'm Jill Dorfler, and I'm the head of the Department of American Indian Studies here at UMD. We're going to be addressing some pretty difficult truths this afternoon. And so it's really critical for us to begin with clear minds and open hearts, and in that way, ready for this afternoon. So with that, I want to welcome everyone again a little bit more thoroughly. Welcome to everyone on Zoom. Welcome to the various tribal leadership that is here, all the community members from various communities, all the students, the faculty, the staff, the administration. Welcome, everyone. This is a broad, open conversation for all of us to be taking part in, and we're honored that you have taken the time to join us today. So, Truth Towards Recognition and University Tribal Healing Project is a Native organized, Native-led, community-driven research movement that offers multiple recommendations on how the University of Minnesota can be in better relations with Indigenous peoples. Truth was established in response to the 2020 resolutions written by the Minnesota Indian Affairs Council, which called on the University of Minnesota to be a better relative to the 11 tribal nations in Minnesota. The Truth Project is a collaborative effort between the Minnesota Indian Affairs Council, or MIAC, as you might know it, and the university. The Truth Project began in 2021 or so, and the final report was submitted in April of this year. A huge amount of work has gone into this endeavor, and yet submitting the report was, in many ways, a starting point of its own. And so our goal for today, really for everyone that's here and is watching with us, the goal is to listen and to learn with a purpose of advancing change. And it took a lot to make this event happen. So I want to start by thanking a large list of people. First of all, my department, American Indian Studies. In May, we worked together to write an affirmation and a response to the Truth Report, which you can check out on our website if you haven't seen it yet. And then this fall, we decided to move forward with this event and then a subsequent event, which I'll say a little bit more about at the end. Miigwech to my fellow subcommittee members who've been doing all of the detail work in planning this event. There's a lot of coordination that had to happen. And so miigwech to Holly Rosendahl, Joseph Bauer-Kemper, Wendy Todd, and Tammy Lawler for all their work in getting the details organized for today. We also have a long list of co-sponsors, of course, our department and the Tribal Sovereignty Institute, and then many other co-sponsors. So the Indigenous Student Organization, miigwech, also running the table for us and helping out with little organizing details, the Indigenous Geoscience Community, the American Indian Learning Resource Center, the Center for Regional and Tribal Child Welfare Studies, the Office of Diversity and Inclusion, the College of Pharmacy, the College of Arts, Humanities, and Social Sciences, the College of Education and Human Service Professions, Leibovitz School of Business and Economics, and also Swenson College of Science and Engineering. So thank you. Let's give a big shout out and thank you to our sponsors for making this happen. Awesome. All right, with that, I want to say that Professor Emeritus Tad Johnson played a pivotal role in the Truth Project prior to his retirement. And now it's my pleasure to welcome him to the stage to introduce the speakers for today.
Miigwech, Jill. Honored to be back here at UMD and to introduce this distinguished group. So I stayed on here a quarter time starting in 2019 and spent 3/4 of my time down at the Twin Cities campus. I had this way long title, which kind of meant tribal liaison, but I was senior director of American Indian Tribal Nation Relations for the entire system. And wasn't sure what we were going to do because I didn't have any staff or any money. But the first thing I made sure the president started meeting with tribes and suggested that, and she did it. And then all of a sudden I started getting volunteers from the Humphrey School to be my interns. And I was like, I don't have any money. And they were like, that's fine. We'll do it. So Laura Painter and Ann Gargiola and Adriana came over, and the first thing they did was have a response. The Minnesota Indian Affairs Council, which Misty worked for, had written a series of resolutions pointing out a whole bunch of stuff that the University of Minnesota had been, a lot of historical injustices that had gone down. And so all of that needed looking into. And so along with the Mille Lacs Band, Ann and Laura and one other intern ended up writing a response to the MIAC, kind of doing research on everything they had mentioned. And then we sort of had an idea, since this article in High Country magazine had come out, and it turned out so much land had been taken from Minnesota Native Americans, especially the Dakota, but also cutting through the 1837 treaty area and other lands up north, that 35 other universities had been built from Minnesota tribal land, including MIT and Cornell University. And so all of those great big colleges on the East Coast and throughout the country got their land grant dollars from the sale of tribal lands. And Alexander Ramsey referred to this as the Minnesota windfall. And so Minnesota came out all right. And these guys will go through the history, I'm sure. But so we had this idea, but Ann ended up, this is Ann right here, Ann ended up finding funding. It turned out there was a group that was applying to the Mellon Foundation, and we're looking at $5 million. Of that, we got 300,000, 384. Thank you. And we decided the best thing to do was to, we got a stipend for the interns, but also gave the funds back to the MIAC tribes, and they ended up distributing it to the tribes of Minnesota. And so the tribes were, in great, get a great deal of credit for drafting this report. But it wouldn't have happened without these three folks. So I want to introduce them. First, Ann Gargiola, and I was noticing the map of the tribes, and Bois Forte was number 1. So that's kind of nice. That's where I'm from. And it turns out Ann is from there too, a descendant of the Bois Forte Band of Chippewa, is a PhD student in American Studies, as well as project manager in the Office of Native American Affairs at the University of Minnesota, which is a new office headed up by Northern Minnesota's own Karen Diver. And so Ann was a core researcher and coordinated the university side of the Truth Project. And these three folks did a whole bunch of work on this. So Adriana Goodwin in the middle is a citizen of the Red Lake Nation and was a research assistant and tribal research fellow. So she wore 2 hats during this project. Was appointed by the governing body of Red Lake to research medical studies that took place on young children on the reservation. In addition, Adriana was part of the of a capstone research team at the Humphrey School of Public Affairs that conducted a forensic accounting of the Permanent University Fund. And finally, MIAC, we were partners with MIAC, and they hired Misty Blue, a citizen of the White Earth Nation, and I think part Lower Sioux as well. Yeah, you were like the politically perfect person. So appointed by the Minnesota Indian Affairs Council, and she will be discussing building collective power with the tribes. During the Truth Project, she assembled a team of Native scholars who have examined the past, present, and future of tribal university relations since the university opened in 1851. These tribal research fellows conducted a place-based, tribally based research using archival and indigenous methodologies around a self-determined topic. Each tribal research fellow presented their experience and their findings at the Truth Project Symposium in May of 2022. Some wrote a portion of the final Truth Report, which was finally released in April of 2023. Oh, the honor song. All right, let us move on to that. So is it Nick? Okay, thank you, Nick. Miigwech.
Buju Nindinaway Maganinadug, Adriana Goodwin, Indigenous Cause, Washku Benesi Quay Nindigo, Mangan Nindudem, Misquagamin Vizagaganing Nindunjaba. Greetings, relatives. My colonized name is Adriana Goodwin, and we would like to welcome you all to our presentation today. You know, how we started off with ceremony and with song, you know, is one way that we acknowledge and honor, you know, the land, our ancestors, the water. And so I just wanted to acknowledge that really quickly. Miigwech, Tad, and Jill for introducing ourselves. And so I'll go ahead and pass the mic along so we can get started. Miigwech.
Hello, Buju. My name is Misty Blue, citizen of the White Earth Nation with descendancy through Chenchayapi. I was the MIAC coordinator, as Tad mentioned, and I'll be talking about our process today.
Buju, Anne Garjola, Indigenous Cause, Asabagoni Zaga, and Ganan Dunjaba. I just want to thank everybody today for such a beautiful welcome, and really take a moment to thank Tad. He's so modest, but he really led us in a good way on this project. And when he was appointed regent by the governor, we were kind of lost. And I think it was sheer stubbornness that finally got that report written. So miigwech Tad. I think Tad often joked, you know, that I was like another daughter to him, but tomorrow is 9 years since my dad passed away. And so Tad has been like a father figure. So I appreciate you, Tad. Thank you. And we just have a few acknowledgements also. So as Tad mentioned, the Truth Project was funded by the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation. And a lot of people made this work possible. The Minnesota Indian Affairs Council and the tribal leaders, all of the tribal research fellows who did a lot of deep heart work on this project. Minnesota Transform, which was our umbrella organization that we received the granting from, and especially Tracy Deutsch, Jigna Desai, and Kevin Murphy, who were the PIs on that project, along with Joseph Bauer-Kemper, who's been a great ally and always going above and beyond to help, and we're really appreciative. And then Jill Dorfler and Mike Dockery, along with Joseph, stepped up to help us formulate a plan when Tad went to the Regent's office, and a plan to finish the Truth Project. And we also had a group of faculty mentors down at the Twin Cities campus who helped really train and get ready our tribal research fellows and the rest of our research team to carry out the work that they were about to do. And then, of course, we'd like to thank the land. Okay, so we're just going to take a moment to situate the project in history. So this map is by Dakota artist Marlena Miles, who's based in the Twin Cities. The University of Minnesota Twin Cities sits in the urbanization of what was once a lush river valley, approximately midway between two places central to Dakota cosmology, Owamniamni, which is also known as St. Anthony Falls, and Bedote, the place of Dakota creation. The many buildings of the university overlook, as explained by Dr. Jim Rock, what is now known as the Mississippi River, is also known to the Dakota people as Wakpatonka, Hahawakpa, or Wakpatonka in Dakota language. It's the spirit road and the earthly manifestation of the Milky Way. It's where this world and the spirit world intersect. Dakota author and educator Ramona Kiddo Stately wrote a story called Pazaha Yayawin. It was the story of Bedote. And through this story, we learned that Bedote, the confluence of the Minnesota and Mississippi rivers, was a place Dakota women would travel to give birth. The water, herbs, and plants found near the islands here aid in birthing and healing processes. And with the help of these medicines, they brought their children into the world at their place of genesis, Bedote. Dakota people emerged from the earth at Bedote. Onchimaka gave birth to them here. Dakota people were created by and from the land on the Twin Cities campus. The sacredness of Dakota birth, life, and death was violently interrupted with the arrival of European settlers who used domination and dispossession to feed their insatiable desire for land acquisition. Other U of M campuses are situated on lands taken through similar coercive measures and coercive treaties with Anishinaabe tribes. The Anishinaabe people trace our roots to the East Coast near the mouth of the St. Lawrence River. The many bands of Anishinaabe people began to move westward due to the prophecy telling them to travel until they came upon lands where food grew on water. By 1858, the United States had made 12 treaties with Indigenous tribes in Minnesota, often through coercive and violent means, seizing more and more land with each negotiation. All of these treaties were broken by the United States. The University of Minnesota Regents were negotiators or signatories on 8 of these treaties. And so I say all this as a reminder that we had thriving communities before European settlement, and because it also shows that this was an intentional act of genocide on the part of the early regents to build the university in these places. This image here is the first plan for the University of Minnesota in Minneapolis. The very first university buildings were built right on the river, right at the falls, Owamyamni, that I mentioned earlier, because the settlers were after the falls because they generated power. And that was the beginning of the milling industry in Minneapolis. And this is where we're meeting today. So Truth UMD research is the work of Sienna Stennett, Anishinaabe Walpole Island First Nation, and student contributor on the Truth Project. The University of Minnesota Duluth is primarily situated on a campus that covers more than 160 acres of land, land that was ceded by the Ojibwe of Lake Superior and Minnesota in the Treaty of 1854. The ceded land was surveyed by the General Land Office in 1956 to 57 and issued as scrip to veterans and as patents to the general public. U of M's main campus was assembled in several chunks, with the largest 2 acquisitions being the 1947 acquisition of nearly 160 acres of a plot called the Nortondale Tract, which is difficult to see, but it's those 2 squares outlined in red. And then the other being a donation of what would become part of the Bagley Nature Center in the northwest corner of the campus. Both areas came largely from acquisition of taxes, delinquent land by wealthy donors to U of M. The lands that unsettled are undeveloped by settlers, though some native families lived and harvested on the land during the 19th century. And in 1947, agents acting on behalf of the University of Minnesota Board of Regents and funded by Regent Richard L. Griggs and other Duluthians acquired the tax delinquent land of the Nortondale Tract for the new University of Minnesota, Duluth branch's future main campus. Our findings also indicate that from 1890 to 2022, iron and taconite leases on this same tract of land have earned the university at least $191 million. And this number is not adjusted for inflation. It does not include reinvestment capital made from the compounded interest over time. And the PUF lands and revenues are managed by the Minnesota Department of Natural Resources. The founding regents of the university participated in treaty negotiations and signing of this treaty, and the Ojibwe were only paid 9 cents an acre, or about $15.13 for this 160-acre parcel. So often during my research, which was, as Adriana mentioned, very difficult at times, I would sit with the land near the river on the Twin Cities campus, Mississippi River, at East River Flats, or on the shore of a small lake near my home, just north of the Twin Cities, and near the shores here of Lake Superior when we were up here doing research. And so every time I followed the same routine, I sat with the land, I gave her some asema, and asked her to accept my deepest gratitude for being here. And I asked her to share a story with me. So as you carry on your time here listening to us, we just ask that you consider the following prompts. Who are you in relation to this land? In what ways do you walk softly upon her? In what ways do you walk hard upon her? In what ways do you see her abundance and resilience around you? Sit with the land, sit with the water, and offer some asema. Ask her to accept your deepest gratitude and ask her to share a story with you.
All right, so I'm going to dive into a little bit of our process before we get into the findings of our research. So we, as Tad mentioned in the intro, the origins for our project really were orbiting around the High Country News land mapping expose that came out, the Minnesota Indian Affairs Council's series of resolutions, and then also Tad Johnson's appointment as the first senior leader at the University of Minnesota in its 170-year history. And so when we embarked on this, I think we knew it was going to be incredibly challenging to start to tell a different story and tell the story of the land, because at this point, there was already a story in motion, which is that of land grant universities. These places of these institutions that are for the greater good and, a very uplifted and positive story about what universities are. So we knew we were going to be challenging that, and we knew it was going to be hard. We'll talk about our findings in a bit, but we, I think as Indigenous researchers especially, already knew within ourselves that, genocide happened here and the university was complicit in that. And how do we start to tell that story from an Indigenous perspective? And so given that we understood these challenges, we really decided that it was important that we do this work together. We started our research and really wanted it to be action-oriented research. We did not want to create a report that would necessarily sit on a shelf going unused. We were going to tell the story, and we wanted to make sure that we were able to set people up and with a tool then to be able to use going forward. We also assembled a team of Native researchers. So Tad and I and joined parts of them, and Adriana was a part of the Red Lake, but basically we went to each of the tribes and visited with leadership there and kind of explained what we were hoping to learn. And we asked everyone to send us a representative from their tribe. We wanted to build a strong research team, and thankfully everyone did. Every tribal nation was able to send us someone to work on our project with us. We did have one limitation, that being this project couldn't go, or we're doing it in partnership with MIAC, so we couldn't yet involve people who are relatives who are still exiled. So I think that is, work to be done in the future, but that was sort of the scope of who we were able to include in this iteration, and we hope that this work continues with more people going forward.
Okay, and so as Misty kind of mentioned, we were very intentional about creating an Indigenous-centered research methodology, and team. And the reason for that is because the university and higher education in general continues to root itself in the violent epistemological hierarchy of Western knowledge, meaning that when it comes to who gets to access, learn, know, write about, and hold knowledge, the university tends to favor Western paradigms over Indigenous paradigms. And throughout this project, we really had to be fluid, and we had to code switch often. So in essence, we had to balance these different modes of knowing to protect our research team while striving to center the Indigenous epistemologies and protect that. So one of the ways that we did this was through a data sovereignty clause. So, we're not we see up here, things happen a little bit differently than at the Twin Cities, right? Indigenous cultures are more accepted here. At the Twin Cities campus, indigeneity is largely invisible. And so nobody down there had really been talking about tribes' rights to data sovereignty, and what it means that tribes have a right to govern and manage their own data. And so this really forced the university to really reevaluate how research was being done. It wasn't the typical research project where you come in, you build a foundation of knowledge for others to build upon. In our agreements with MIAC and with the tribes, it was very clear that they were the owners of all of the data. They chose how they were going to participate or not, what their deliverables were, what their scope was, and what they were going to share ultimately with the public and with the university. And this is done intentionally because Indigenous peoples really have a painful history regarding Western research. And there have been efforts in the past to further colonize or assimilate Indigenous people through research questions and policies based on research findings. There's a tendency to take data, knowledge, and resources without regard for the needs of the community and without regard for reciprocity. It's imperative that we as researchers use culturally appropriate strategies to dismantle these power dynamics and interrupt those historic patterns.
So a big part of our research across the board was going into the archives and to examine different letters or correspondence between the First Board of Regents, land scripts, land parcel maps across time. We also looked at accounting records and bond receipts, obviously treaties and congressional acts that kind of interplay with all of this, and were the mechanisms for which the land could be expropriated, and then leasing agreements. As we've kind of alluded to, it was also something we knew was going to be really emotionally challenging as well, because we'll see the words, or we'll see narratives about, Native people. We'll also just see the way that land was transferred and wealth was transferred out of communities, and how it's been built over time, and how at the same time there was a lot of deprivation in our own communities, right? So given that, we also wanted to make sure that our process was something that was very intentional. We weren't just going to approach this from, mind and thought. We wanted to also make sure there was enough room and space for mind, body, spirit, emotion as well. We were able to offer talk therapy for any of our researchers who wanted it. We were able to work with an elder for emotional and spiritual support through our process, and making sure that we came together as well to be able to talk through, of course, our research and what we were learning, but then also like, what does that mean for us emotionally as well. We did institutional genealogy, so going back to the origin in 1851, when the university became a university and who was involved, and Anne will be sharing her findings about that. We did a forensic accounting, so basically looking at the accounting books over time, and Adriana will be sharing about that. We have a couple of slides, I believe, that cover the land valuation, and so that's, what the land was worth, in quotations. And we also did place-based archival research, and that's where we call them the Truth Research Fellows, TRFs, were able to do a study based on the interplay with their tribe and the university. So each tribe did a study from their own perspective, and there was a number of topics that were covered, and it was all self-determined. So like one person actually worked with her son and went to the archives with him, and we used the Minnesota Historical Society archives. We use the university archives. We also, some people use like county archives as well. And we came up here and met with librarians about the Duluth archives as well. But she did her project on the dams and the way that the university has, sort of commanded the river over time, in partnership with the Army Corps of Engineers. You'll hear more about Adriana's research into medical ethics with Red Lake. Another researcher did his work about the student experience, having been a recent student. So we really had researchers across the board who were, younger and just graduated all the way to elders. So we really wanted to showcase a range of experience and a range of topics that came up. So we already went through this, but basically the Minnesota Indian Affairs Council was the partner on this project with the University Office of American Indian and Tribal Nations Relations. I think for us as the core researchers, we had a couple of metrics of success, knowing that this is a huge undertaking. There's 170 years of history to kind of go through. We wanted to, I guess, measure our own success about, how well are we able to incorporate those culturally relevant research practices, and mention the data sovereignty protections, making sure that we're expansive enough to allow people to use Indigenous methodologies, having that emotional and spiritual support. And we really wanted this, again, to be Indigenous voices. So we hosted a symposium, as Tad mentioned, in May of 2022, where each of the tribal research fellows in the core team were able to present their findings. We invited leadership from all the tribes, and luckily we were able to have tribal leaders in attendance. We invited senior leadership of the university as well. And we held it on the University of Minnesota Twin Cities campus on the West Bank. Again, we wanted to do this together. So we had week-long training in January. We did one-to-one meetings with folks, and we all came together weekly to discuss our research and our experience. And our other metric of success was making sure that this story gets uplifted and disseminated widely. So Indigenous issues don't really get a lot of press or a lot of coverage or a lot of platforms. So that was something we really wanted to push for this project as well. So our findings are all covered in the report. The report is widely available. If you want to scan the QR code, you can download it. It's very long, like over 500 pages with all the appendices, but we really wanted to err on the side of more information. We want this to be a tool for people wherever your position allows you to push this work. I think it's really important that we cannot leave it at just a report. We sort of need everyone to be pushing in the ways that they can to implement the recommendations that we have. And we can't just appeal to the moral imperative of leadership as well. We really need to be making sure that we're asking for the right legislation, that we're, pressuring them with the right litigation, and that we are, it's already happening, but pushing things through protest as well.
So I'll discuss some of my research findings. So as Ted mentioned, I coordinated the university side of the project, and then I also did my own research in the archives, both at the Minnesota Historical Society in St. Paul and the university archives in Minneapolis. And so this was important because for a long time, the university has claimed, like Misty said, part of this land grant story. The university has long claimed to be a benevolent benefactor of land that just suddenly appeared available and were gifted acres of land by the federal government. This stance, however, fails to acknowledge the violence, genocide, and dispossession enacted by university agents through institutional, state, and federal policies. And because U of M's position as the region's premier institution of higher education, that narrative has largely been accepted by the public. And so what my research ultimately shows is that the University of Minnesota was established as a type of shell corporation, one method among many used by high-ranking colonial politicians to funnel and launder monies made from the dispossession and genocide of Minnesota Makoche's Indigenous people. The Board of Regents consisted of lawyers, businessmen, politicians, and financiers who controlled land sales and local business development. They passed legislation, negotiated treaties, and ran the university in much the same way that they ran the government and their personal affairs. In fact, when we look through the archives at their personal communication, it was really hard to determine at times whether they were acting in the capacity of senator or regent or president of the Minnesota Gold Mining Company. So they used their connections and knowledge taken from intimate relations that they had built with Indigenous peoples, often through endeavors like the fur trade. And they had at their disposal university faculty, state departments, maps, journals, and ledger books, listing all of the sections of land that they would ultimately choose in their land grab. This information was gathered in various surveys, the most concerning of which was the state-sponsored geologic survey of land conducted by the state geologist Newton Horace Winchell, which identified particular areas that the regents considered rich in timber, mineral, and other resources. So continuing to center the land, our researchers examined the various ways that the regents acquired the land. So we know about the Morrill Act of 1862. However, we have mapped to date nearly 170,000 acres of land that the university took in multiple land grabs since it was first opened as a territorial institution in 1851. This particular map here is available online and it's interactive. The colors are kind of difficult to tell on here, but to the north, Anishinaabe King, to the south, Dakota lands, Unchimaka. And so the red, sorry, I'm trying to read those little things there. The red are the current land holdings from various land grants. As you can see, most of them are in this 1837 and 1854 treaty territory. This is where the university has a lot of mineral leases that they continue to collect profits from. The blue dots are lands granted to the university through the Morrill Act of 1862. And as you can see, those were primarily Dakota lands. The reason for this is at the time, the governor was Alexander Ramsey, who was also a board of regent along with Henry Sibley. And they were the two men responsible for the Dakota War and ultimate exile of the Dakota people. So in 1851, the university was opened as a federal territorial institution. By the end of that decade, the founding Board of Regents had mismanaged the funds from that initial land sale so much that there was a legislative inquisition. They never cooperated, and ultimately the matter was closed by the state legislature when a new term came about. So they hired financial experts to come in, who were people that, again, we know their names. John Sargent Pillsbury of the Pillsbury Company came in, and they were looking for ways that they could reopen the university. So they lobbied the federal government along with then Senator Henry Rice, who was also on the Board of Regents, to get Minnesota included in the 1862 Morrill Act, and that's how the university reopened in 1868.
So as Indigenous peoples, we often hear that we have to walk in two worlds. And so I didn't really understand this concept of walking in two worlds until I moved to the Twin Cities from home in Bemidji. And I was like, over time, I was like, what? It's just one world. But, moving away from home, I really started to understand this concept. So not only do I have to understand who I am, and that I meant to be here in UEP, Ijanaban, that my spirit chose my parents, and that even for all of us in this room, right, we were all meant to be here. We all came here today. So not only do I need to know who I am as an Indigenous person, my culture, my heritage, a little bit of my language, but I also have to understand in the Western world. So I also have to understand how money is made, how policies are created. And so this financial component of the project was really important for us, very, very early on, right? What about the money? Not because, we place value on money as Indigenous peoples, but because Western society does. And because that dollar, that almighty dollar is king, right? Taxes, land sales, buying food, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so coming into that, we had that understanding that this financial piece, for them to be able to understand, our hardships, our losses, how that transfer of wealth has impacted our communities today, we needed to understand that. We needed to have concrete numbers. So the number you see here on the screen is the 2020 Permanent University Fund total. So when researching the contents and growth of the Permanent University Fund, which was created in 1851 to house the sale of the Morrill Act lands in perpetuity. So what in perpetuity means is that $591 million just needs to be accounted for on the books. So I'll get a little bit more into in a couple slides how they were able to use this $591 million and transfer it all over the state of Minnesota to build what we currently have. So the Minnesota Historical Society archives provided a comprehensive account between the years of 1906 and 1963. Biannual reports from the state auditor to the Minnesota legislator documented the different streams of income into the fund, as well as a brief overview of the investment of the fund. These reports that show that between 1906 and 1922, the different modes of profit into the Permanent University Fund were through sales of PUF land, sales of timber on those lands, mineral permits and leases on the land, royalties on the iron ore mined from those lands, and profits on sale of bonds. After 1922, an occupation tax on iron ore was instituted on a state level, which contributed to all state trust funds on a flat rate basis. While these records provide a complete accounting of revenues from land holdings, they do not report the returns on any investments made from the PUF. So in a few slides, you'll see that there are interest rates associated with the bonds. So those interest rates then become discretionary funding for the University of Minnesota. So again, if we're aware a little bit of accounting, so there's those discretionary funds, you're able to spend them pretty much however you want. And so we'll talk a little bit more later on in the presentation about how we think those funds should be spent. So it's really important to understand how much disposable income the University of Minnesota has in comparison to what we, as specifically our tribal communities of the North, have. And again, we'll talk a little bit about the social disparities that we as American Indian people live in Minnesota today. So Anne talked a little bit about this. So this, again, is one way that the University of Minnesota is making money off of stolen Ojibwe and Dakota lands. So the iron and taconite mineral leases from 1880 to 2022 has made $191 million. Again, not adjusted for inflation, that's about $500 million. So if we looked at even what we've received in federal funding to operate our tribal programs, that's nowhere near that $500 million not adjusted for inflation. And so that's just kind of showing how much money the University of Minnesota has at its fingertips, and why, again, the Truth Project research is so important, why these numbers are so important. You can't deny that. It's on the books, it's there. And again, we're just still beginning to understand the massive amount of wealth that the University of Minnesota has at its disposal. So I talked a little bit about this. So that $500 million that we've seen on the last few slides, one way that they were able to transfer that wealth, again, from Ojibwe and Dakota people, so the colonized state, was through the sale of bonds. So from at least 1869, the Permanent University Fund has been used to invest in municipal bonds throughout the state. By 1884, the Permanent University Fund had purchased 277,000, roughly 8.1 million when adjusted for inflation of Minnesota adjusted bonds by July 31st, 1912. The PUF had purchased $637,000 in municipal bonds, about $19 million when adjusted. With the limited time to do the research, the latest example of a municipal bond that was found was from 1975. The later examples also displayed low interest rates from about 2 to 4%. When the PUF purchases bonds from cities and counties, the university is both earning revenues to support the university's mission and supporting the municipalities as they undertake capital projects to serve their local populations, so long as the municipalities made their payments to the university. So the roads, the hospitals, the infrastructure that the state of Minnesota has, again, is from the Permanent University Fund. So again, we as tribal nations, we don't have access to these kind of dollars. Our infrastructure back home is not good. Again, it's from a lack of not having access to these resources that the University of Minnesota and the state of Minnesota have at their discretion. So with over a century of investing in the cities and counties of Minnesota from very early on in Minnesota statehood, it's evident that the PUF funds derived from tribal lands and resources extracted from those lands have been important to the growth of the colonized state. The circulation of wealth from the university to the municipalities of Minnesota and back does not include the tribal nations whose lands those municipalities now occupy. From what was available in the archives, there was no investment in tribes by way of municipal type bonds. This to us represents a large transfer in wealth from tribal nations to colonizers. So a little bit more about the Permanent University Fund. 80% of the profits do go to the Minnesota DNR. So we are making a little bit of progress with the Minnesota State DNR. So we as tribal citizens, we get into the state parks for free, but that's not enough. And the other 20% is then, no, got that wrong. So they get 80% of the profits, and then the other 20 go to the Minnesota DNR. The university controls the state's trust lands, including the PUF lands, the school trust lands, the swamp lands funds, and the salt spring funds. And those other three funds that I mentioned are permanent accounts that the state of Minnesota does have access to. So the permanent school trust land is a $120 billion account that does have ties to the 1862 Morrill Act. So again, right, we're just touching the surface with this just one report that's 20 some pages long. That's included in the broader truth report. And we kind of talk a little bit more about the recommendations. We need more money to look at more of these accountings. In fiscal year 21, the total income generated by the university from state trust lands was $7 million. Over the last 5 years alone, the University of Minnesota has banked over $17 million. And $17 million to a tribal nation, that could be life-changing for some of our people, to be able to purchase homes and to be able to fix that infrastructure that I was talking about, to be able to reconnect to our culture and to our way of life, the very things that the University of Minnesota has tried so hard to strip from us.
I just want to put a finer point on this as well. So through our research, we have found a mechanism of settler colonialism. That's what Adriana's research has found. And I think a lot of times we all feel very mystified as like, how did this happen? Like, how did colonialism happen? This is one of the ways that it happened, where the funds were actually taken from Indigenous people and invested in settler communities. So one of our recommendations you'll find is that we have, our stance is that the Minnesota legislature should divert the PUF. So divert the Permanent University Fund, and that is legislatively possible. They've done it in the past. They've done it for other things because the university, or because, that money can be reinvested back into Indigenous communities. And we can shape that change as well. Everyone here can shape that change. Okay. So, another big broad learning that we had was what happens to the land happens to us, right? So we were divested from, right? And so the consequences of the loss of land, of loss of connection, have really manifested in the poor social determinants of health for our people. And that is passed on through generations. So this was a great deep trauma that happened and has, you know, had effects that have manifested through generations, through the past 7 generations that displacement occurred. Healing as well, resiliency as well has also been passed on through our bloodlines. And we think that the Truth Report really is a part of that healing, right? Because we think about trauma, and trauma really asks us to forget. And the way that we heal is that we remember, and we remember what happened, and then we can shift and bring us onto a new trajectory.
I just wanted to add to, you know, I don't really want to focus too much on those disparities that we talk about, but I think it really is important for the conversation as we think about the transfer of wealth. And so 28.5% of American Indian people live in poverty in Minnesota today. That number is much higher in the 7-county metro. I'm talking about 70%. It's sad, right? For us to be this impoverished, for us to have this much taken away from our people. But we are still here. And, you know, there are those in the room here today that are those knowledge holders, those knowledge sharers that have reclaimed who we are in the face of adversity and have found great healing in our culture, in our way of life. So yeah, miigwech, that's all I had to say on that.
So when we're talking about structural racism and the way that, you know, university is complicit in that, we have a couple of stances that we've come upon through our research. Settler systems have created harm. We've kind of demonstrated the harm that it can create, especially now in this moment of like, there's also climate crises and racial and health disparities. And so we're in a moment that we're really uncovering the roots of systemic racism across it. We're collectively doing that in different spheres, right? And so we offered up our recommendations through our report, and that was through what we're calling prescribed burns. And so that really means examining the policies and the mechanisms that have allowed for this type of harm to happen, and to change them, to move away from being a site of harm and move into being a site of healing.
Misty mentioned the prescribed burns, and so that recommendation really comes from the name of our report, Oshkigan Nujamoa Way, which roughly translates to the spirit that heals the land through fire also heals the people. So while we were researching and writing the Truth Report, the University of Minnesota came out with a story that they had been working with some tribes to kind of reintroduce the Anishinaabe way of land stewardship, which was cultural burns. And so we also thought that that could apply to policies at the university, right? To find the ones that aren't working, that are set up to support structural racism, and to create new policies. And so that's, you know, one of the recommendations that we have is for a thorough policy review at the university, so that all of that can be remedied. The systems that have caused harm are the ones that need to invest more, and more than enough, right? In order to help the rebuilding process. And so this is possible through the renewal of systems, right? So we are in a system, the University of Minnesota system, but we know that living things thrive in ecosystems. So how do we move the university beyond being just a system and into an ecosystem where people can not merely survive, but also thrive? And so these are what we call burn sites. It, from what I've understand and from the elders that I've spoken with, this traditional land management technique of cultural burns was really led by elder women, and they would come together and decide where the land should be burned, and the entire community would come together to support that process and renew the landscape through these cultural burns. And what research being done at the U on the reintroduction of this method shows is that not only does the ecosystem become more biodiverse, but our traditional foods grow in its place. So blueberries thrive on land that was burned. And so just thinking about that and thinking about how our collective voice has the power to reshape these settler institutions that were really designed to exclude us and or divide us. So when we experience injustice, we just are looking to, channel that energy to change. So that's really what this tool, this report is for, is to really help push for change at the university.
So when we're talking about within the university or within our project, we have really tried to we've really tried to see transformation and inform and shape transformation in 4 ways through our tribal consultation that we did and are doing and continue to value. And we really believe that the university leadership should continue to be in conversation with tribal leaders, leadership to leadership, historical and economic impact through the findings that we shared with you today. And there's more in the report. Through rematriation efforts. So, the Wiseman Museum had a NAGPRA failure, and we have been informing that process about how to make sure that those relatives get home. We have ideas about rematriation through library and through archives as well for some of that repair, and through policy efforts. And so I know you were leading those. You want to say any more about?
So as Tad mentioned, I work in the Office of Native Affairs under Karen Diver, and really pushing for some policy shifts in the wake of the Truth Report. So one thing that we're pushing right now is Indigenous research guidelines that have been published through the Native American Affairs website. So it's naa.umn.edu. And those are available for anybody doing research at the university to use, and currently working on pushing those through the University Senate to make it formal policy so that this problematic research that's been happening doesn't happen anymore, and that researchers really start to move in a good way and build relationships and trust and reciprocity with Indigenous peoples when they're doing research. Another thing that is happening is we are hiring a NAGPRA coordinator who will go to each of the 5 campuses and take a thorough inventory of all ancestors and their belongings that are being held, whether they are on the books or in somebody's closet. And then, of course, there was free tuition for folks who are enrolled in one of the 11 tribes within the geography that's shared with Minnesota. However, we know that that's not enough, right? Because this is missing, it's based on Blood Quantum 1, right? Which was also developed by university professors, right? Who went up to White Earth and did a bunch of eugenics experiments up there in order to be able to take more land. And then 2, it also misses all of our Dakota relatives who were exiled by the founders of the university. So we know that transformation is possible through our process and through our product, and that this is not just a movement within the university, but it can also be a movement beyond the university. So we held several listening sessions with tribal leaders, with our tribal research fellows, and others in the community to get a whole bunch of recommendations on where they felt tribal university relations could go from here. And so we group these into broad categories. One, land back. We feel the regents should move towards a practice of looking at lands that can be given back on an annual basis. Another is reparations in perpetuity. As Adriana mentioned, all of that money will be be held by the university and continue to make profit for as long as the university is established. And so we also ask that our communities receive reparations for as long as they're profiting off of the sale of our lands. To increase representation at all levels of the university. We know that one person in senior leadership is not enough. It's going to take more and a type of shared governance to really move beyond anything, and to have more than one person consistently voicing in a room full of opposition, right, what needs to be done. We asked that the regents enact policies that respect tribal sovereignty and cultural heritage, and diverting the puff streams, which was already mentioned, is one way that a lot of these recommendations can be paid for. And what this ultimately means is that the university is meeting its trust obligations to the tribes. And then also the tribal leaders requested that research continue to be funded to unearth the truths that happened in their communities.
And then I also wanted to mention Jalen Strong's research. He was the Boys Fort Tribal Research Fellow. He was a student here at UMD, I do believe, and wanting to highlight this because of where we are, not knowing if there are educators in this space, but his recommendations are around our Indigenous grieving protocols and kind of the process that takes, and for educators and teachers to be aware of that and more work withable with your students. So really wanting to encourage the educators that are here to look at Jalen Strong's report, just to get a better idea of those things, and how to have those conversations with Indigenous students in a respectful way, in an understanding way, because for us to even have our master's degree is a feat in itself. I think 7% of American Indian people have their graduate degrees. So for us to even make it to to the university is a feat in and of itself. And so the more support that we can get from teachers and educators, the more successful that we will be.
And then just one more thing on funding for these recommendations. So while there's not new mechanisms of settler colonialism being created by the university, the policies still automatically default, right, to these mechanisms. And so one current way that has happened is a recent sale of land down in Rosemont, Minnesota, to Meta, who is Facebook's parent company, for approximately $48 million. And that land was initially taken by the U.S. Department of War during the Dakota Removal Act. And it was an ammunitions depot during World War II, after which the university picked it up for free because it was no longer being used by the government. And what was stated was that they had to hold on to it for 25 years, and then they could do whatever they wanted with it. And so really looking at the university's master plan for this area is to build a city of the future. But so again, building up colonizer state at the expense of our tribal nations. So looking for ways that future land sales can go to fund Indigenous initiatives, similar to what is happening in South Dakota with the Waikato Initiative.
So we want to just close with what has been the response for the Truth Report since launched in April. We have seen some really great efforts to continue some of the research by the Tribal Research Fellows. So Lori Harper, who is our Tribal Research Fellow from Leech Lake, has taken groups of students into the archives to continue to understand university tribal relations from the perspective of Leech Lake. And we also have seen really great efforts happening within the university. So we've gotten letters of support from different departments. We have connected with a book club who is our first, to our knowledge, cross-departmental collaboration that has read the entire 500-page report and are, you know, continuing to build and continuing to create from that. We've had a lot of response from the press, so that's local coverage, state coverage, national, even international coverage, which is really great. You know, not a lot of times Native issues are not covered, and you know, we don't get the chance to say tell our story, and so it's really important. We have been able to present, and we're presenting next week in New Zealand. So we're continuing to push this issue with people and educators and people in research and Indigenous groups as much as we can. We think it's really important to establish that solidarity around Indigenous issues, and that way we have learned a ton from other folks who are committed to this work of sort of outing settler colonialism. We have an essay coming out the day after the Thanksgiving holiday. It's in the First Nations Development Institute. And then we, Adriana and Anne, have a piece that's part of the next iteration of the High Country News expose. So if you want to keep following this issue, like, those are some good ways to stay tuned in.
So I guess to kind of close out our speaking presentation, just wanting to emphasize and highlight too that you know, the Truth Project is not only for, you know, communities or people from outside of our community, but it's also for us. You know, I found you know, a lot of sadness by some of the research, but I've also found a lot of healing, a lot of connection, because, you know, we as tribal nations, we all have very unique histories, and we don't always come together on an issue, but we did come together on this. We did see a common goal, that this was something that we needed to come together on. And so that's that concept of Wagiman togetherness. And so again, all of us here are now a part of this journey. And you know, because of systems of harm and colonization that has transpired in many different ways. And for us as Indigenous peoples, we experience high rates of violence. Our American Indian women experience high rates of violence. And I wanted to take a moment to honor Sheila St. Clair. She was last seen here in Duluth. Those are my cousin's mom. And again, you know, through this pain, all of us know it, we feel it. And so to close out our conversation or our presentation, I'm going to sing an Anishinaabe Kwe song. Some of my might not be pronouncing some things right, but I stumble through it. I get through it because I know that there are language speakers here, language sharers here, and so I just want to do it in a good way. So Chimigwech, I'm going to stand actually over here so I don't hurt Misty and Anne's ears. Miigwech. Anishinaabe.
Miigwech. That was amazing. I'll ask everyone to give a round of applause for this fabulous presentation. Was fantastic. I know that everyone, I'm sure, learned a lot, had a lot to take in, and this is just, as you said, scratching the surface in a lot of ways of the report. There's a vast amount of information there. But our purpose today is just to get the conversation started. And I know that some departments and groups have already been involved in this and thinking about it, and some are new to it. So we want to just take a few minutes here to have some Q&A. And we have someone with a mic who will be coming around. We have a person right here in the back. So go ahead, and we want to use the mic so that it's recorded on Zoom and that everyone can hear.
Bonjour, Ndenoi Maganaduk. Mkwa Ogaman, Dijnakazo, Mkwa Dode, Mkwa Mekong Indunjaba. My colonized name is Gabriel Pelche. I just want to extend my hand in Guamazin for the I can feel it in you. Just the there's no even account for what the Anishinaabe psyche goes through in these settler academies. The sheer psychic damage to our critical thinking process just to be colonized in so-called higher education ways. And it interrupts our true way of coherent, clear, critical thinking as an Anishinaabe. And I just wanted to ask that question, you know, will there be a way in some of the policies that we can restructure the Settler Academy, you know, so that we might so-called higher educate ourselves in a different way now. But in Guamazin, that all that came, or anything that has come through this, that it all comes back and that your spirits might be whole now.
So I guess I'll take a go at it first. So we really actually haven't seen much response from university leadership at that higher level. So a lot of the departments that you've seen as sponsors here today is because that was on their own will. Where I went to school at the Humphrey School, so they recently just came out with an American Indian scholarship to kind of help offset that balance. And so that's kind of where we're seeing more movement from, is not from university leadership at the highest level, but because, you know, people like Jill, people like Joseph, you know, are listening. And so I think that's more of an intrinsic thing, right? A personal thing, right? To be able to open your heart, to be able to listen. And I don't know that there are, you know, there are still some people that are totally closed off to that. But there is some progress being made. And so we're seeing that, you know, Misty mentioned us being invited to that conference in New Zealand. And yeah, I guess if somebody else wants to pick up where I left off.
Yeah, so you know, I think this is something that I hear a lot from my mentors in American Indian Studies on the Twin Cities campus, right? I don't think that we can decolonize the institution, right? As we've tried to show you all, this system was not created to pour into us in the same way that it was other people. It was created to extract from us. Now, I don't think it's completely hopeless, right? There's pockets of the university that can be indigenized so that we can make it an easier journey for those who are coming after us, because we know how difficult it is, and that's some of the work that needs to happen.
I also just did a little bit of work with MSU. So our Ojibwe, Odawa, and Potawatomi relatives in Michigan. And they reminded me that, you know, just to also give a little space here is that we're not just learners for 4 years of our life. We're learners. Somebody said they were learners, or they thought of learning, formalized learning, as cradle to career. But we're lifelong learners as well. So just wanting to make sure that the conversation is being expansive in that way. And also in the way of, like, Adriana, you reminded me of this, is that we also have tribal colleges too. And we also have like pathways to learning that we are directing and managing as well.
Any other questions?
Yes, thank you for all the work that you've done. And I have a question for you. In all of your research, what have you found the university has done with respect to stewardship of the land that was taken?
I think broadly what we kind of learned right away is that the university established itself by building on the land, but also building with the land. And a lot of that is through the sale and then the leasing of the minerals and resources found on the land, right? So that was I think the big overall.
So when you said, stewardship of the land, I guess my first thought was the Fond du Lac Forestry Center and the genetic testing of the trees and what kind of goes on there. So I think each tribal nation will have a little bit of a different take at that. So I know that, there's negative impacts of mining, right? And how it affects wild rice beds. And so again, when we look at the definition by the United Nations on genocide, it fits those definitions of genocide, right? So I think that there probably has been some positive things, right, with some of the stuff that they do, but we also have to take that with a grain of salt because of what was lost. And how, that one slide that we have research done to and not with, right? So we were never like consulted in any of those processes. And also we're uncovering some research as well right now, where, we didn't actually give away our mineral rights, right? Like we had an idea of everything on the land, below the surface and in the sky. And so we've been coming across different things in different treaty negotiations where that's what they said, right? That we retain these rights. And somewhere along the lines from those treaty negotiations by Alexander Ramsey, Henry Rice, what's the third one? Henry Sibley, right? That changed along the way. And so each tribal nation will have their own story of that. Yeah, go ahead, Misty.
Each tribal nation will have, one more thing. Each tribal nation will have their own story, and the overall story is that the university looks at land in very much in a way of commodification. And when I think now when Anne was describing like the prescribed burns, I think that Western science is sort of kind of catching up to Indigenous knowledge paradigms. So those are kind of two of the big themes that we heard.
Yeah, so I think that there's a good example of this that we found in the university archives of this commodification of the land, right? It wasn't stewardship, it was commodification. So thinking about the trees, right? We had massive old growth forests. And when those early land surveyors made their ledgers, they listed down all of the more than human beings that were residing on each square acre of land. And within just a 6-year span, the regents went from discussing these as, there was X number of trees on the land to now there's 6 million feet of lumber available for the taking on this land. So there has not been great stewardship of the land.
I guess I just want to add one more comment too. So like this idea of revisionist narratives. So Paul Bunyan and Babe Blue Ox is another huge one. And so there's a teacher, a grandma, Elaine Fleming. She talks about this and about how our people, when they came out of their lodges and they seen all these trees clear cut, how sad that was, and how that negatively impacted the ecosystems. Right? There were no rabbits. There were no, small birds, the animals weren't there, and to make it through that, right? And they made it through that with love. right, for their future 7 generations. And that's also about what this project is about embracing those Indigenous value systems and remembering what it means to be a good relative to one another, to the land, and to, reclaim who we are as Anishinaabe people in our gentle ways, and to become whole again.
Miigwech. I want to give another miigwech to our fantastic researchers, our co-sponsors, all of you who have joined us. Thank you. There's a lot to sit with here, and it's going to be some digesting, and like we said, hopefully really the beginning of the conversation in a lot of ways. We are interested in your feedback on this event. We have the QR code up here. It's also in a little sticker if you took one of the executive summary handouts that's right there. There's a couple of other signs around the doors as well. So in the next day or two, we'd love to have your feedback on the event. And then, as I noted at the very beginning of this event, this is the first of sort of 2 parts, and we're working on the second part. We know it's going to be January 29th. We're working on the exact time. We're working on the exact location. There will be both in-person and Zoom options, and we'll have Tad Johnson back with us for more, and also Karen Diver, who was mentioned today, of course, Senior Advisor to the President for Native American Affairs here at the University of Minnesota. So keep that in mind. We'll be sending out a sort of more formal save the date when we get a few more details in order there. In the meantime, I hope that each of you will continue these conversations between now and then, and your departments and your communities. And I hope that we are really at the start of a real momentous transformation that has been a long time coming. And so with that, I'm going to turn it back to Nick to close us out with a traveling song. When Nick is done, I welcome everyone to have some snacks. We actually have cream puffs, which I couldn't stop thinking about during the event because of the Puff Fund, and now we're going to have cream puffs. So think about the university's dollars as you're eating the snacks today, and what steps you can take to make a better relationship with the university. All right, miigwech.